So in this step, we're going to be solving a subtle user experience issue. So if we refresh our application, you can see that it looks like everything is just fine, right? We have our feed, we see a little loading icon, and then the application snaps into place. But this is deceptive because we are working against a server running on our local host. So to see the problem, I'm going to open up the developer tools, and in Chrome, if you click on network, you can throttle the network. And so I'm going to click on GPRS to slow it down and refresh the page. And you'll notice right here, there's a moment where we see feed at the top and there's nothing displayed. It's a blank experience. And that's because that instant that we don't see anything represents when there isn't any data and the application doesn't have anything to render. And so even at this speed on localhost, it still pops in pretty fast. But if we're running against a production server and there's half a second or 2 seconds of delay between when we request the data and the time it comes back, we end up showing the user a blank experience. And that's a really bad user experience. We don't want to create that, right? So how do we solve that? So to address the issue, we're going to go into the components folder and we're going to open up our feed. And so the feed, this is the one that's actually fetching the tweets. And if we scroll down and look at render, you can see that we get the tweets and then we render the tweets. But the first time, at the top here, the first time that tweets are actually requested, they don't exist. So there's going to be a moment when this component renders and there isn't actually any data for tweets, but we still try to render the experience. And so to solve this problem, we get to look back and take advantage of the state property on our data structure. So to address the issue, we're going to create an if statement. And we're going to say if tweets.state is equal to fetching, right? And this is basically what we're looking for, is if we're fetching the tweets, then we're going to render a different experience. But now we don't actually want to use the string for fetching because this is going to end up all over the code base. And luckily, we don't have to use the string. So if you go into your source folder and you look at a folder called constants, there's a file inside of that called payload states. And if we open that up, you can see that there are constants created for all of the starting states, the things that are going to be common to most or all applications, right? And inside of this, we can see fetching, right? One of these states is fetching. So instead of using the string, we're just going to use the constant in this file. So let's go back into feed and we're going to scroll up to the top and we're just going to include that file. So payload states equals require constants payload states. And now we can copy that, and here, whoops, we can get rid of our string and just say payload states.fetching. So if the state of this data is currently being fetched, then we want to render something else, right? So we want to tell the user that they're loading. But to do that, we're going to go into the index.html file, and I'm just going to copy this h1 that already has this loading text. I'm just going to reuse that class. Right, so I'm going to replace that with the same style. And I'm going to save that. And now if we refresh the application, you can see that we're loading. Oh, it's taking a little bit. All right, so I'm going to disable throttling. I'm going to refresh the page and then re-enable throttling. Refresh. But it looks like I didn't use the right, not class, I need class name. All right, so we're going to refresh. We can see loading, the header pops in, we see loading, and then the experience displays. All right, so refresh one more time, loading, header, we see loading text, and then the experience pops in. So text isn't necessarily the best, but you can imagine that being replaced with a loading experience or anything that's appropriate for your application. But the point here is that it's very easy to capture that state and then react accordingly. So that concludes this section. In the next section, we're going to be looking at adding a create button and dialogues for creating, editing, and deleting data.